Every classroom, every book, every teacher, it all starts with numbers. The census helps us understand how many students we need to prepare for, where new schools should be built, and what resources we need. Education is the foundation of our future, and accurate data helps us to build stronger. So participate in the 2025 Population and Housing Census, because every student deserves
a good education.
Mapping the present, shaping the future.
Hello, good evening, and a warm welcome to this edition of the Census and You as part of ABS TV Presents. We continue our focus on the 2025 Population and Housing Census. It is an ongoing exercise started last year. The National Bureau of Statistics wants to complete it by the end of this year. They had to take a break ahead of the general election in April, so it has been a little bit more protracted. But they say that the timeline of the end of this year is dependent on you, your participation. So let me ask you this question as we welcome you to the Census and You. Have you been seen by an enumerator? Have they come to your house yet? If so, how did you treat them? Did you cooperate? Did you provide the information that they're asking you for? Well, if you didn't, well, you missed an opportunity to contribute to national development. Yes, we're not being hyperbolic. That's absolutely what the census information is for. National development. It aids in planning and for development. So in other words, it is able to provide an empirical way of matching resources and services to the communities that we reside in. That's what the census really is about. So the National Bureau of Statistics is embarking on this initiative. So every Monday evening for the next few weeks here on ABS, we are devoting 1 hour to providing you with information all you need to know about the ongoing census and how you can play a part in it. And we are also taking the opportunity to dispel any misconceptions you may have, because it is the age of misinformation being on steroids. It is the age when it is easy to spread misinformation, and the truth is always catching up with the misinformation. Well, this evening, we're making sure that the truth is ahead of the misinformation. So when you hear the misinformation about the census, you can easily disabuse yourself of that notion, and you can easily shrug it aside. So this evening, my guests are the Director of the National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Stachel Edwards. He's been with us here before on this edition of Census and You, actually about 2 Mondays ago, so he's back. He can't stay away too long from this program, you see, because he has crucial information to share. And to Stachel Edwards' right is a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, Mr. Andrew Nurse, who's also the Chief Surveyor in the Surveys and Mapping Division in the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Fisheries and the Blue Economy. We won't talk about that other section or that other area of his portfolio this evening, certainly not this evening, but another time certainly. But in this capacity, he's here to talk about his membership of the Technical Advisory Committee. All right, welcome Mr. Edwards and Mr. Nurse. Really appreciate having you.
Right, thank you and good evening.
Excellent. All right, so let's start off here with again, a warm welcome, whatever the platform you're using to join us. Stay with us for the next 45 minutes or so, because this is going to be crucially important. If you miss this information, you miss an opportunity to contribute to national development, or to hear about how you can contribute to national development, right? Crucially important. So please pay rapt attention to what these two gentlemen have to say. So let's start off with a look at where are you now with the census? Percentage-wise, are you 30% there, 50% there? What would you say at this point?
Okay. So from the last time that I was here, we spoke about in terms of an activity what we call the blitzing or the team approach. And we have deployed teams in Green Bay, Grace Farm area, also in Herberts, also parts of Lightfoot, also Painters. And that component of the census is going very well. In terms of that approach, in which teams of 3 to 4 enumerators will go out with their field supervisors and other support staff and enumerate those areas, has been successful in terms of the rate of enumeration. In terms of coverage, we're now active in 221 enumeration districts out of the 400 enumeration districts in Antigua and Barbuda. Completion, from the last time I checked, it would have been roughly about 10 to 15 enumeration districts that are fully completed in terms of fully enumerated. We have not deployed in every enumeration district, of course, to 21, so that means in every community we have not deployed teams or enumerators in each enumeration district. That will happen. We're taking a little bit time to get to each enumeration district, but it will take place. In terms of the overall coverage, it depends on what community we're in, different rates of completion. But in terms of the areas that we did the team approach, we're roughly over 50% in most, close to 75% in most of those enumeration districts that I've mentioned just earlier.
Yeah, so 221, there are 400 in all.
Yeah.
On Antigua, the mainland.
Yes.
In Barbuda.
Antigua and Barbuda also.
In Barbuda, how many?
Both.
Both.
It includes
400. Okay,
Antigua
good.
and Barbuda.
Good, excellent.
Yes.
I hear about 8 are in Barbuda, 8 enumeration districts.
Roughly about 80 enumeration districts in
So
Barbuda.
about 392 roughly
Yes.
are in mainland.
Yes, the majority, the large majority, of course. Would
Of
be
course,
in it.
of course.
Yes.
Let's talk about the response that you've been getting so far. I know that there has been a lot of misinformation and disinformation that you've had to contend with.
Yes.
Has that dissipated somewhat?
Yes, but
are you still getting it?
yes, but of course, misinformation, as you said in your introduction, it's easy to spread and sometimes difficult to combat. And so we have to constantly be out there present, giving correct information, accurate information, and exactly what is happening. For instance, last week when my colleagues were here, they would have spoken about something that was being circulated on social media. Although there's no evidence that that actually occurred in Antigua and Barbuda, social media, that platform, it would have circulated, and so we had to do our necessary, or take necessary action to make sure that we dispel any misconceptions or any issues or challenges. Of course, proper identification of enumerators, what to expect when we go out on the field, and if you have concerns or issues or challenges, what are the ways in which you can have those addressed.
Okay. A bit later on in the program, Mr. Edwards, we're going to be talking about the questionnaire.
Yes.
Not in full detail, but I look at some of the questions that are asked in the questionnaire and why it is important for the statistics team to ask you those questions, and how this ultimately, the upshot of this is ultimately to drive national development and planning, more effective strategic planning in terms of that. So we're going to make that connection a bit later. Mr. Nurse, let's talk about the role of the advisory committee, the technical advisory committee, and your membership on it. What's that the committee? What does that committee do?
Okay, so thank you very much for having us, and good evening to the general public. Basically, the advisory committee, what we basically do is just assist the census office with various information, any technical support. Sometimes, for example, if it has to do with training, right, it may not go as planned, and so you may want that extra ear, basically, see how we can tweak something or whatever the case is. So the technical, that committee basically just, lend that support towards the census office so that you can have a little bit more efficient, dissemination of information, data gathering, and the whole works.
Okay, so you monitor, and you're almost like a steering committee kind of thing.
Basically, yes.
Okay. How has it been going so far for you on that?
So far, very good. I mean, it's a very interactive session. It's not one that you go and sit down and twiddle your thumbs, right? But it's very hands-on. Yes. You're getting live feedback from the public, and we're discussing, how we can improve for the next enumerator that's going to go out and deal with the next general public.
What has been the biggest challenge that you've seen so far, and how have you been able to navigate those challenges and eventually, hopefully, resolve them?
So I think one of the biggest challenges would be the misinformation, right? There have been a few reports of those. How do we deal with that? As I said, we strategize in ways, and this platform that we're on right now is just one of those ways, that we can help to combat that. Let the general public hear what is really happening. Visibility is important, right? And we don't want any sort of misinformation out there. It is a very crucial element towards any society that we capture the right information at top quality.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about in future programs. We have about 5 more of these programs until the end of September, where we take a break here on ABS. Before the end of September, we'll have a Spanish-speaking section of this program as well. So, habla español? Well, we're going to talk about that as well. All right? Aprenden español poco poco. So, okay, we're going to get there. Let's talk about this area. We're going to come back to you, Mr. Nurse, in relation to the areas of that misinformation, disinformation, and how that can be combated, because this is so crucially important. Mr. Edwards, the questions that you ask, there are some individuals, I think by now we have dispelled the notion of the information feeding through to immigration, to inland revenue.
Yep.
You made it elucidatively clear, you and your colleagues, that you are duty-bound by law to prevent this information, personal information, from going to anybody else who is not authorized to see it, including immigration and inland revenue.
Correct. 100%.
And this is at pain of prosecution. You could be prosecuted and sent to jail, you and your colleagues, if that happens. Good.
Yes.
So you made it elucidatively clear. But some individuals might now have a reservation. Why are you asking me these questions? It's like inquisitive. Why do you need to know how much money you make and that kind of thing? So let's talk about the questionnaire.
Yes.
And the main questions that you ask. I mean, pretty sure that it's dozens of questions, so we won't be able to go through all of them. But the main ones. Let's say, for example, to the head of a nuclear family. What are some of the questions that you ask?
Okay, so the first thing the enumerator will ask in terms of going up to the dwelling unit or to the building is that observe the materials of the outer walls. So what are the materials that the outer walls are made out of? Concrete, wood, galvanized, any material that sheetrock. Then the other would be what are the materials of the roof, and that would be the first. And then depending on the type of dwelling unit, the first thing they will ask after that would be in terms of whether it's occupant, the occupancy, who are the occupants. Basic household information is then captured. So, like, what type of dwelling is this? And when we say what type of dwelling it is it a duplex? Is it a townhouse? It's a detached home? Then it will ask in terms of who's the owner, or what is type of ownership. So is the building owned? Is it leased? Is it part of some type of rent-free agreement, or is it rented? And then if it's owned, they will ask in terms of what's the sex of the owner. And you may ask the question, why is it that they want to find out what is the sex of the owner of the property or the building? And the reason why we'll ask a question like that is that if we understand in terms of land ownership, the building, who owns the property or who owns the building, then therefore we can disaggregate it by sex, then therefore we have a tool there to analyze and say, okay then, the female to male ratio in terms of ownership, is there a great disparity? If there's a great disparity, do there need to be incentives or policies put in place in terms of to increase ownership for whatever group that is being disadvantaged? So that's why we get to the granular level in terms of we disaggregate by sex. And then we ask basic questions in terms of the house or the property or the building itself. What type of facilities, what type of fuel do you use? What type of kitchen facilities do you have? What type of water? What's your source of water? So basic information in terms of the buildings, because it's a population of housing, so the housing characteristics component.
But before you continue, Mr. Edwards, does the enumerator then go inside the house to look for him or herself what the person is telling, the resident is telling him or her? Do they, let's say for example, they ask what kind of fuel you use? Do you use gas? Do you use an electric stove? Do you use gas stove? Do they go in and actually see for themselves?
No, the enumerator would not go and say, okay, I need to observe this. If any enumerator goes in and says, okay, I need to observe this for myself, feel free that is not the way they were trained. So if an enumerator comes and says, well, okay, you said that you had a gas stove, can I see the gas stove? No. Whatever you say at that point in time, they may ask follow-up questions, but they would not ask to observe or to see for themselves.
Fair enough.
It will be basically in terms of, they may ask questions if, for instance, you are living in a house that is a concrete house and it has shingle roof, and you say that you have a kitchen that is made out of, let's say, cardboard. They might say, are you sure that that kitchen is made out of cardboard? To verify that the information is correct. But they would not say, okay, let me see the kitchen to see if it's made out of cardboard.
Okay,
so
that's important. That's important. That's important. Fair enough. Okay. So that's on the physical structure. That's on because it's a population and housing. So there's a housing component here.
So other questions about the housing unit. What type of assets do you have, or what type of, so say if you have a car, if you have a motorbike, if you have TV, and how many. Now you may ask yourselves, okay, why do you need to know this information? So we're asking those questions on two prongs or two approaches, one or two reasons. Basically in terms of the quality and standard of living, and so in terms of what are the assets and resources that an average household will have, and the disparate or the changes or the differences between different communities. And then also it helps us to track in terms of from previous censuses, how things have evolved, how things have changed from previous censuses in terms of ownership of assets. Has it increased, has it decreased, and the types of assets that are being owned also. In terms of, for instance, 15, 20 years ago, you would have had a lot of, well, not a lot, but persons would have had satellite dishes. You go to an average home now, there's not satellite dishes. There's, you have fire sticks, you have different, ways of... Yes.
Getting the internet TV and
right, internet TV. And so therefore, the types of assets and the types of facilities or resources and services persons access or use changes. So we also want to capture that information and analyze it to see the trends over time. So then after asking questions, and there are more questions about the housing component of it, the housing and the physical, and also in terms of the services that you access, like in terms of what type of, when I said access to water, do you have public pipe water, do you use a cistern? And so you may ask, why do you need to know this information? Okay, so then the access to water, then therefore if you're talking about community development or development, do you have communities that are deprived of certain resources or certain services, and do you need to deploy more resources into those communities? And if you're thinking about the population shifts, what is it that the needs are for various population or subgroups within that community?
Okay, so you're asking these questions not because you're inquisitive, but because it is going to be used by policymakers on aggregate, not individual information about Mary Jane or John Doe, but when you aggregate the data in a particular area, it will be used by policymakers to make determinations and to make policy decisions.
Correct. Policymakers, also the business community, also in terms of development partners, and then also the everyday man on the street will have a better understanding. Where is it that Antigua and Barbuda, in terms of its development, in terms of its characteristics, where is it, where does it sit, how has it changed over time?
Before I go to the population part, because we've pretty much been dealing with the housing part, let me get Mr. Nurse on this. From where you sit on the technical advisory / steering committee, any concerns in relation to the housing part, in terms of when the teams go out and ask about the housing part? Any concerns that residents that you've been picking up?
Well, not necessarily from the resident standpoint, right? But more from the enumerator standpoint. So before the census would have started, there would have been an entire listing situation. What we find, though, is that in Antigua and Barbuda, houses are moving ever so often. So you go there today, you will find this nice structure. You go next week, there is none. That do create a little bit of frustration. And having the census, capture data just like this so that we can understand, the shift and the move of people, right? So that is really more of the concerns that we're getting as opposed to the, on the flip side, from the general public.
Okay, so no concerns so much that you've been picking up about the kind of questions about housing. In other words, people are not saying, why are you asking me this about my house and whether or not I use a gas stove or an electric stove? People are asking.
I mean, it's typical. It's typical from the time you get a, personal, people are going to, defend and not want to respond to those questions. That's very typical. So the enumerators are actually trained, how they can soften this approach so that, the public can be assured that the questions are legit. And they're not information that will be used and just blast on the media, but more or less for the policymakers to make that informed decision, not on an individual basis. It's very important that they understand it's not on an individual basis. It may just be on a subject, right? And so they will capture now maybe a percentage of the entire population that is affected by whatever the situation is.
Excellent.
Yeah. So if I may add to
sure,
that.
Please.
Sure. As Mr. Nurse would have said, the challenges in terms of the housing component or the housing part of the questionnaire, it's pretty straightforward. There's, limited, negative feedback in terms of or reluctance from respondents. The population part of it, the individual questionnaire, there are components in which persons would ask, why are you asking that level of detail? I'm sure we'll discuss this
We're
later.
going to come to that right now. By the way, we're going to be going out for the next program next week. We're going to be on the road with the census team. So not in studio for next week's show. We're going to actually be on the road with, it might be Mr. Edwards, it might be Mr. Nurse, it might be other members of their team, but we're going to be on the road next week, Monday, for that section. Because in other words, we want to give you a bird's eye view and a panoramic view about this exercise, not just from officials from the census team, such as Mr. Edwards and such as Mr. Nurse, and Mr. Martin was here last week, and so was Mrs. Joseph.
Mrs. Anthony. Mr. Anthony was here last week.
Mr. Anthony and Ms. Joseph.
Yes.
Yes, Tracy and Joseph. Right.
Yes.
Both of them were here last week. So it's not just about the officials coming in, but it's also actually going out like what we did a few weeks ago with the team there. They were on Matthew Street. Mrs. Joseph made it clear several times. She said Matthew Street. It's very clear about that. So yes, we will be going on other streets as well. So crucially important to get a sense and to get a flavor of how the enumerators go about doing what they do. And they must be commended, by the way, because sometimes they get some tough responses, and they're able to be very, very affable about it, and are able to massage the answers out of individuals who sometimes are very aware and skeptical. And so the enumerators, take a bow. You're doing a fantastic job. We ask that you continue on that. We'll be out on the streets with you for the next program. So that's on the housing part. Again, it is crucially important in the aggregation of the data to look at the housing stock in the country, I figure.
So let me give you an example. So between the 2001 and the 2011 census, the population on average would have grown by 1% per year. On average each year, 1% growth from 2001 to 2011. However, when we look at changes and shifts within the various parishes, and various communities. So for St. John's, the parish of St. John's, we split it or divided into St. John City and St. John Rural. So St. John City, the population would have actually declined by 9% from 2001 to 2011. But St. John's Rural, the surrounding environs, would have increased by 41%. So you saw, between 2001 and 2011, we saw that in St. John City, there's a decrease in the population, and in the same period of time, we saw a 41% increase in St. John's Rural. And
so was that a clear point-to-point movement where people actually moved out of the city and moved to the rural parts of St. John's?
Yes.
On the outskirts of St. John's, the suburban areas?
Yes. So clearly we're seeing a shift in terms of, so yes, we're counting the population, but you may ask, why is it, so now that you have, okay, so you see that there's a shift in the population. Other parishes we would have seen, like for instance in St. George, there was about a 20% increase in terms of the population. In the other parishes, there are small decreases, like 2-3% changes. In Barbuda, there was a slight increase also, but we saw the population in terms of the shift. So you asked the question, I answered in terms of the housing information. In the 2001 census, when we talk about ownership of land, so for the dwelling units, the land, in terms of persons who occupy that particular, where they live, the land, in terms of ownership, roughly about 51% of households said they own the land in which they live on, right? 51%, and that was in 2011. In terms of the actual building or the home, in terms of ownership, it was roughly about 47%. And then in regards to owned outright, and about 15% that owned with a mortgage. And then in terms of rented, it was roughly about 30%. So when we ask this information, we're now having in terms of the characteristics of the population, then we can say, okay, and now when we capture this information for 2025, we can see, are there changes in terms of the ownership profile? And then remember I asked the question, or I indicated that there was a question about in terms of the sex of the owner of the property. Yes. Now can you imagine we add in that dynamic, that dimension to it, then we can even do further investigations to see how changes and shifts have happened over time.
You notice Mr. Edwards and Mr. Nurse, they've indicated data trends. They didn't say person X owned this and person Y owned this, because the information is not about, it's never individual. It is aggregated. It is put together, and then what the policymakers will look for when they're reading this information, when the National Bureau of Statistics puts it together, collates it, is what are the trends in this? What are the big data from this? And what are the particular areas that can be, that are needing improvement? And that may need policy interventions. So for example, do we need to incentivize more females to own property? If you are able to ask the sex of the property owner, that allows you to be able to make a determination on that. Crucially important. So again, it's not your personal information that is going to be put out there. It's the information of everybody. And then, so it's almost like impersonal information. Personal information is given to the enumerators, and they turn it into impersonal information to guide policymaker decisions. I suppose that's, there's nothing to fear in relation to that. There's no line behind the bush in relation to that. When we come back from this break, we're going to be going into the population part of the questions. So we dealt with the housing part of the questions. So why do they ask you, like, why do they ask a woman, did you have a child, and what was the age, what was your age at the time you had a child? We're going to go into that. Mr. Edwards and Mr. Nurse will explain that to us. Again, it is how the information is going to be collated. If you have any questions, by the way, 4622996, you can also hit us up on Facebook as well. If you have a burning question for these two gentlemen, call them and ask them. Live. They can't say no, they don't really ask you. When we come back much more on this edition of the Census and You, it is providing you with the information, unfiltered, unvarnished, just facts. We're adding light and not heat to the discussions here. We're all about facts and logic and rationality, not emotions and sensationalism, right? So if you have any questions about that, ask us. When we come out, we go into further into the questionnaire, and why the questions are asked and why it is so crucial for national development. We'll come back much more. Stay with us.
Every classroom, every book, every teacher, it all starts with numbers. The census helps us understand how many students we need to prepare for, where new schools should be built, and what resources we need. Education is the foundation of our future, and accurate data helps us to build stronger. So participate in the 2025 Population and Housing Census, because every student deserves
a good education.
Mapping the present, shaping the future.
Welcome back. You're watching The Census and You. ABS TV presents here on this Monday night. We thank you so much for joining us on whatever the platform you're using to join us, whether radio, television, or online platforms. My name is Garfield Burford. With me in studio is the Director of the National Bureau of Statistics, Mr. Stachel Edwards, and with him is a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, Mr. Andrew Nurse. Mr. Nurse, by the way, is also the Chief Surveyor in the Surveys and Mapping Division in the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Fisheries, and the Blue Economy. Gentlemen, thank you so much for staying with us. So, on the matter of the housing component of the census, there's the population and housing census. So, it looks at the housing stock in the country. Again, not specific information about where John Doe lives and where Mary Jane lives, but it's it's all compiled information. There's, Mr. Nurse, a straight line between this and also the efforts to do a better job of mapping the country, the geospatial data. Let's talk about that. That's right up your street.
Okay, so when you look at it from a geospatial standpoint, as the general public is aware, they would notice that the team is using tablets. Before it used to be some booklets, stacks of papers. Now it's more of the technological, we're using the technological capabilities. What this does, it actually allows the census office to capture not only more accurate data, but also at a faster pace. Now, you may wonder why all of this is important, right? But when you look at the population standpoint, there are a lot of burning questions, all right? Be it social, economic, cultural, whatever the case is. And so the idea would be now to understand what exactly is happening within an area. So is it like clusters are being created, or is it sparse, or whatever the case is? And these in turn then triggers responses from the government standpoint.
Okay, good. And that, of course, then leads into questions or matters such as services that need to be provided in a particular area, or more of a particular service, I suppose.
Yes.
Because it does appear to me, gentlemen, that there might be some significant demographic shifts and population shifts to particular areas without many people noticing it. And it's only when we actually get empirical information that it is clear that, wow, this area is growing. Except if you're living in the area, you realize that it's growing, but outside of the area, you might not recognize that it's growing. On the matter now of that's crucially important, especially in the geospatial data. It's because data collection is rather sparse in the Caribbean sometimes. And it is one of the areas that could be plugged, one of the loopholes that could be plugged with information, collected information from a census like this. So here now, Mr. Edwards, the population part of the census. And individuals might be saying, why are you asking me specific questions about certain things? Let's go into what questions your enumerators ask about the population part.
Okay, so after the housing component, and then there's also a part in terms of the housing coming close to the end where we talk about persons who may have lived in the household and moved, like basic in terms of immigration information. We then go into the individual section, or the personal questionnaire. And for each member of the household, we ask these questions. Now, depending on the age and also the sex of the individual, they get different questions, or they don't get all of the same questions. But basic information that's collected on each individual will be their age, date of birth, sex, their ethnicity, their religion, their education level. So for instance, let's say you are a 24-year-old that is working, and then we will ask you basic information about in terms of, are you currently attending like school or education facility or education institution? And if so, what type of area or subject are you undertaking a course of study? If you're working, are you doing some type of program like on-the-job training? So we ask questions depending on the type of individual. If it is a female, if it's a woman and she is over the age of 15, we ask questions also, the same basic questions, age, sex, and date of birth. And you may ask, why do you need to be so specific? Because what we want to do is be able to, two things. One, you may give us age, and then we use that date of birth to validate and verify. So some persons will say, okay, yes, I'm 27. Then when they give the date of birth, so no, I'm really 28. And then of course, not saying anything about the elderly population, but there's also used in terms of, I say, okay, I was born in 1968. That's not very old. I was born in 1938, and that's not very old either.
I mean, what are you going to say, 1800?
Well, I was born in 1938, right? But then there's give you an age and it doesn't match up, but then you use that to verify.
Right.
Then So education attainment. Now, when we look at the same information that we're talking about, and Mr. Nurse would have mentioned, now when you add that and you talk about the education attainment, when we look at that and we aggregate that information, we say, okay, how many persons with a tertiary education? In the last census, it was roughly about 10% of the population had a tertiary. When I talk about tertiary, university level education. The most popular was a secondary education, forms 3 to 5. It was roughly about 55% of the population had a secondary education, and then various levels between for make up the 100%. So then when we capture this information about education attainment, and we're talking about for the 15 and above population, so these are persons that and you may ask why the 15 and above, that's the international standard, or the standard that we recognize within the region for comparable purposes.
Yes, awesome.
And then when we look at this census and we ask that same educational information or attainment information, then we can see, okay, what happened compared to what happened in 2011? Persons with university education, has that increased? Has that decreased? Persons with secondary education, what's the, or persons that have vocational and went into vocational training or vocational educational attainment. So we use that information to analyze at the aggregate level, as you mentioned, and provide in terms of how has the population shifted compared to previous years, and where is it in terms of, if we're talking about we want to have achievement in certain areas, we want to develop certain sectors, then therefore what is the education level? What is it that we need to invest in to make sure that the population can move in that area? For instance, we want to get into robotics and we want to get into AI. Do we need to look in terms of investment in certain areas? And then when you get more granular to the community level, if you want to put an institution in that particular community, if you want to develop programs that are catered for that community specifically, then therefore this will give you that level of information. So we ask about the education attainment. Then we ask about if you're working. So if you indicate that you're of working age, 15 and above, and then you say that we ask you basic information in terms of your employment. First, we ask you a question. Did you undertake any type of activity for at least 1 hour for economic purposes in terms of for pay or for profit? Now, you may ask the question, 1 hour, just 1 hour within a reference period. That's the international standard. So it's not that it's peculiar to Antigua and Barbuda. It's the international standard that is provided. And other countries, when we compare, that is the same standard that they use. So other countries within the region, if we're comparing ourselves to other countries in Europe, if we're comparing ourselves to other countries in Africa, that was set by the International Labour Organization, the ILO, and that's the standard they use in terms of what's defined as but in terms of undertaking
gainful employment.
Yes.
So essentially, this allows your office, the National Bureau of Statistics, to measure the country's progress and certain key metrics against all other countries around the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the same measures are being used across the world, so we can have an effective measure for, social, economic development and for services and so on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so then additional questions we would ask of the individual is in terms of the health and insurance. That's come close to the end of the questionnaire. Of course, this would be persons of a certain age, and not everybody will get that question. Now, for women of a certain age, 15 and above, they will ask questions about fertility. And why we ask these questions, have you had a child within the last 5 years? Have you had a child that, how many children have you had, and continue. And we're trying not to mind your business. We're not trying to find out whether or not you had a lot of children or not. That's no concern of ours, but we want to see the fertility rate. Remember that I said earlier that the population between 2001 and 2011 grew on average per year at 1%. What we noticed also between those 2 years is that dependency ratios have decreased significantly from 1991, roughly about 64%, to 49% in 2011.
That's the dependency ratio.
So that means that in terms of the persons that are of working age, how many persons that they support, right? And so if you have persons of like 100 persons of working age, they support 64 of the population, 49 of the population, 49 persons within the population. And am I clear or not?
So if, in other words, dependency ratio in terms of at a family level or on a national level?
On a national level.
On a national level. If they're working, based on the
working
ratio,
age group, working
how
age
many
group.
working people to people who are not working.
Yes.
So in other words, they support the other people who are not
Right,
working,
correct.
especially for pension and so on.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Right.
Crucially
And
important.
what we notice is that because of reduced fertility rates, right, the youth dependency ratio has significantly decreased because people are not having as many children as before. Now, how does that factor in? Is that means that as the population matures, you have an aging society. There are less people that are going to be of that working age population that can support other persons, and so therefore you have a higher dependency of all the people on a limited or smaller number of persons.
That is frightening, right?
It's
worrying.
good. It's good information to know. So that you can.
No. It's worrying if that were to happen. If the data were to show that that's happening, meaning that you don't have enough people supporting. Working people supporting, for example, older people who are not able to work.
So that is the information that once you have it, I wouldn't say it's frightening or worrying. I would say it's good information because it allows you now
what
to
to plan.
make
Plan around it.
yes, and make interventions.
Yeah, can I also
Sure,
say
please,
that just to carry on to what Ms. Edwards was saying, if you look at it from the geospatial standpoint, what you can also do with that technology is to determine, you can match against maybe the sector, right? That tool will give you a certain level of information. And to answer a question as to why is it that the fertility rate, because you can now look at it from a parish level, right? Why is it that the fertility rate in this parish is like that? Now, maybe, just maybe, they might be making way more money and they have no time for children, right? So is it really a bad thing? Is it really that frightening? The only way to know or strike that balance, again, is to look at it comprehensively, pull in all the data together. And that's where the geospatial component comes in. You will have that live view of what's happening, and you'll know how to change your
Approaches and policies and so on.
well, eventually, yes, you'll get to the policy level, but that will be done as long as you can change the matrix, the variance for you to find what is what.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So-
you were tempted to get to the jargon there. You almost
trying
heard
to bring it back.
matrices. So I'm like, people would never, matrices, never mind. All right. But never mind. We should never take our audience for granted. Our audience would have understood it, of course. But thanks for that. That's crucially important. But what I was getting at earlier in terms of, if, for example, we find that there's an aging population, the fertility rate, on aggregate, again, nobody's going to say Mary Jane has 2 children or Mary Jane has 1. Nobody
Very
cares
important.
about the individual data. So don't worry about it. You can give them the answer. 1 child, 2 children, 3 children, whatever. It doesn't matter. Because when they collate all of that information, it gives a national picture. And that's what we're looking for, a national picture. So that we can analyze the data to determine what it means, what are the next steps that need to be taken. If, for example, there's a policy position that needs to be taken in relation to the pension, to the Social Security, or to the national pension situation, perhaps you have empirical data on a national basis to drive that. So don't worry about giving the answers about the number of children. It's not individual data that's going to be used. So don't worry about it. They're not going to say, wow, I went to so-and-so and they told me that they have 2 children. Not important, right? What's important is when you collate it. So is that the most perhaps sensitive one for women in terms of the questionnaire?
Because a part of it would also ask in terms of mortality. So within a certain period of time, have you had a child that would have died? And so that can become sensitive.
Right.
That could be sensitive for the woman. So,
Yes.
of course, when the enumerator reaches to that part, he or she has been trained in how to approach it. You just don't break into it and say, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions about mortality. How many children are dead? That will not be very...
It will be very insensitive.
Yeah, very. So,
Yes.
that is not the approach that they would have. They will then change in terms of, and they will, say, okay, I'm going to ask you some questions. This might be a little bit sensitive. We note in terms of your responses. And if also you want to make sure you're asking the questions in an environment where the woman feels comfortable in providing a response. You don't want it to be a situation where, there are a lot of persons around and there's a lot of activity and a lot of moving parts. So you want to make sure that the person can provide a response and be in a comfortable environment.
Good. Let me just ask you, why is it important now to ask about the mortality. Is that to gauge infant mortality rates as one of the demographic pieces of data?
Yes, that is to gauge in terms of infant mortality and also in terms of how does that compare to administrative data that we would have on that particular topic. Now, Mr. Nurse would have mentioned in terms of, and you're asking about fertility, and Mr. Nurse made a very good point. When you look at the different types of questions that are asked, then you can look at in terms of, okay, the education term, do we see fertility changing based upon, or what is the impact of what, when we look at it and analyze it through the lens of education level? Income, so you ask the questions, which is another sensitive area. People don't like to answer questions about income, and that's not peculiar to value level.
They don't want to say how much money they have.
Exactly, because they think, well, I shouldn't say what they think, but, you know, concerns about what is it information is going to be used for. But there was, you know, the information, when we look at income levels, how does fertility relate to income levels, right? So then, therefore, when we analyze it through education, income levels, then different demographic information, then we can see and strengthen our ability to say, okay, there may be issues or correlations, or there may be challenges or issues that are peculiar to certain groups or subgroups that you might want, not might, but should give further reason for further investigations and further analysis.
Good.
So that is why we ask these questions at such a detailed level, not to know your business, not to try to find out a greater detail and share it with any other entity, but when we analyze it, the richness, the ability to analyze and provide clearer answers based upon the level of detail, once aggregated, can give us insights that if we don't have that information, will be more limited.
In terms of national development, we're looking at some pictures of the census team, and again, great work to the census team. By the way, when you have two together, is that part of the blitz?
So yes, that's the
census
blitzing team. So that will be like a field supervisor and an enumerator. So the lady in the pink hat will be a enumerator, and the field supervisor is guiding them, okay, what are your boundaries, what are the areas that you are supposed to actually enumerate. So first, when they go into the community, they canvass the community to make sure they understand where exactly. In the Blitz, remember from previous, well, just to recall that in previous episodes when we were up here, is that they would go to different blocks within that particular ED or that particular. So, for instance, let's say 3 of us are enumerators, and you will be section, and this is the area you operate. I will operate in this area, and Mr. Nurse will operate in that area. So the field supervisor will walk and say, okay, you don't go and cross over here, you don't go and I don't cross over here, and Mr. Nurse doesn't cross over here. So they're mapping out the area, just getting familiar with the surroundings, and then they will go to the different buildings and they will start the enumeration process. So before they even go into the start enumerating households, they usually go in before and map the area in terms of walk or canvass the area to make sure that they're familiar with the surroundings, making sure they are sure about the boundaries, using the geospatial information, but you also want that eye, bird's eye, if you got it on the ground and see the actual, because what you see on the map might be one thing, but when you're actually in the community, and as Mr. Nurse would have said, there might be changes that would have happened since we would have done the mapping exercise in 2024.
So you might wonder, I mean, what has happened to, wasn't there somebody here, wasn't there a house? Correct. So you have to kind of refamiliarize yourself with
Correct.
this.
And even if there is a house that has moved, we have the ability to change that on the tablet. Or for instance, let's say there's a household that was not there at the time of the mapping activity. We can add that household and collect that information or that building to the map and actually enumerate that building. So in terms of movement of buildings, that does not impact our ability to conduct the exercise. We have the ability to add in additional buildings, or we have methodologies in terms of to deal with buildings that are no longer there also.
Yeah. So, and this comes back to you, Mr. Nurse, in relation to the geospatial data. So you can possibly do a time warp of the look, for example, of Antigua, to look at how it looked in terms of the housing stock, let's say in the last 2 or 3 censuses, and to look at how it has developed over time. So you can say, well, look at, for example, this particular area, most of the population has actually moved to this particular area. They moved on to the city and go on to the rural areas. You can actually do a time warp, so you can actually see that visually. Can you?
Correct, yes. That's just one of the features. And I mean, we have to understand that we're progressing economically, not just economically, but just in activities that we do on a day-to-day basis. Right now, everyone has a cellular phone, and they use Google Maps, for example, just to find, you know, the closest restaurant, whatever the case is. That is one area. But then as policymakers or various ministries, what do they do at the back end, all right? And so to be able to look at these time lapses, that's very, very crucial. You actually get to understand the necessary changes, the demographic changes on a national standpoint.
I see your point. Gentlemen, we're running out of time rapidly. We have about 7 minutes left, and I think there was a little bit of internal joke. I'll share it out. I'll share it another time. I think I know why, especially if it's the nurse laughs. It's extraordinary how time flies. But in relation to, for example, let's look at what you also do for your day job, apart from serving on this committee. Mapping lands, for example. So let's say, for example, is this a part of ensuring that we know how much arable land is there, as opposed to where people live, for housing, land for housing? Does the census also help with that? So we can look spatially at it, geospatial data, and know that the arable land is in X and land for housing is in X. Okay. Is that part of it?
So what the census data will do is to give us a very clear idea of where you have residential from any other lands. And I use the term any other lands because it could be for any purpose, right? May it be wetlands or agriculture, whatever the case is, right? So some people may drive around the country and say, oh, there's a lot of lands here, or there's a lot of homes here. This used to be my grandfather's farmland, whatever the case is. Yeah, so what are we going to do in terms of planning, in terms of the next major housing development? So when you look at a situation like this, then it will actually tell us, okay, well, maybe we need to regularize the area. Maybe they're squatting, right? So it may be an area of regularization that we may need to look into. Or it could just be a community that is expanding, right? How did that change, and how does that interact with maybe environmental factors and that kind of stuff? If these incidents were missed earlier, you have a chance now to actually see what mitigation can be put in place, to stop future issues.
Including if, for example, there are environmental hazards in particular areas, like flooding and so on, it does appear. So again, this is not individual data, this is collective data, national data. Now, can you imagine you travel to a major conference in Europe or in North America, and these two gentlemen are there at the conference, and there's a big screen, and it shows the data for all the countries who are represented. It might be about probably 30, 40 countries represented there. And they go into granular detail about several other countries. When it comes to Antigua, they can't go into granular details because they don't have the data. Now, can you imagine how you would feel if you went to that conference with these two gentlemen? Now, the census is going to be a big part of addressing that, because there will be the data available, the national data, to populate all of those metrics, and Antigua and Barbuda would be on par with all these other countries at a conference with data, current data. Can you imagine you have to use the census data from 2011, last time we did the census?
Yes,
right?
correct.
2011. And everybody will be looking at you like, 2011? We're in 2026. Why are you using data from 2011? So, can't overemphasize how crucial it is that we have current data. You don't have to worry, they're not sharing information, immigration, inland revenue, who else is it? Customs, whoever, doesn't matter. They can't share it with anybody. It's going to be made whole, as in aggregated, put together in one lump, like in a pot of soup, and mixed together. And it gives you a collective data. So if you're the Irish potato in the soup, or the pumpkin in the soup, it doesn't matter. You're all in the one pot. So it's not going to be, when the soup is shared, they're not going to say, oh, this piece of pumpkin was put in by Mr. Edwards, and that piece of, no, it's not like that, all right? So you don't have to worry. And by the way, we're going to have, as I said, the Spanish community, Spanish-speaking community, and Mandarin community in this program as well, in terms of ensuring that everybody gets this message about it. All right, gentlemen, we have over 3 minutes left in the show. Starting with Mr. Edwards. So any other questions that some individuals might have barked at in terms of thinking that it's too sensitive? Apart from the fertility questions and the income questions, because those two perhaps are a little bit.
The income questions, and then also questions relating to the sources of income or sources of, because you have salaries, you have whether or not you receive remittances, if you receive from like social contributions and etc. So those are some of the questions that persons often have reluctance to. Questions related to the relationship, like if you're currently in a relationship, that can also be, certain households was want to know why you want to get in, that level of detail. And
please explain why you're asking that one.
So
the relationship person.
So it's basically in terms of your marital status and then your union status. So the first question asks you in terms of what is your marital status? Are you married, divorced, single, widowed? And that is about your legal marital status. And then the union status is your current union status. And the reason we're asking those questions, again, we're looking at the trends over time. We've seen there's a difference or there are changes over time in terms of unions within the country. We've seen that persons, their marriages and common law marriages and decreasing, increasing, changes over time in terms of union status. How's that change over time? So it's not about us wanting to know your personal information for any type of our personal
gossip, no sensationalism, no salacious kind of interested in because it's going to be made in aggregate. It's going to be all put together.
Yes.
Okay. So there's an income question. There's a source of income. So in other words, you want to know, in addition to, for example, a salary, if individuals get income in other ways.
Yes. Correct.
Again, explain for the viewers why you asked that question.
So, similar to in terms of the income question and the sources of income, the reason we're asking about the sources of income, all right, how are people supporting themselves? What are persons using to attain whatever quality of life? Because we have asked you about in terms of what, basically your well-being, your status, your standard of living. Right. So how are you able, not you as an individual, but at the aggregate level, in terms of supporting that or achieving that quality of life?
So that now allows the policymakers and, for example, international agencies to look at Antigua Barbuda, for example, because you hear a lot about Antigua Barbuda, the GDP per capita income being used as the sole criterion to determine whether or not the country accesses certain official development assistance. This data could also be crucial in relation to that, because it could also, when you strip away all the data, you'd realize that there are certain vulnerabilities that are masked by GDP per capita, and if you were to only look at GDP per capita, you would not be able to see some of those other areas as well. So crucially important for the economy, for investment, for business development, and so on. And again, they're not going to when they ask you that, the data when it's published is not going to have your name in it. It's not going to say, well, look here, look at page number 2, Mary Jane. No, it's all going to be put together, right? So you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so that's the source of income. And marital status, because you're looking at trends, demographic data, demographic trends, and so on. Good. On average, I know it depends on the number. The number of questions depends on the person's age and sex and so on, stage of life. On average, probably about 40, 50 questions per person.
I wouldn't want to say that. I would say in terms of the duration of the questionnaire or the duration of the interview, it can take between 20 to 25 minutes or depending on the number. Let's say, for instance, you have a household that has 8 or 9 persons or 10 persons, then it will take over hours, of course.
Fair enough. But if you answer the questions quicker, the quicker you answer the questions, I suppose, the quicker it finishes, right?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Yes.
Good. All right, Mr. Nurse. Final point to you in relation to, and we'll come back to Stachel for his final point. Andrew, the area of the business community, because you're not only dealing with residential areas or residential residents, TS, but you're dealing with businesses or business operators. Right. Why should they also be wanting to cooperate and to give information for the census as well?
Okay, so it's also very important that you understand the type and nature of businesses, where they're located, why they're located in a particular area. Again, the way how the census questions are set up is not to single out any specific thing, right? But they complement each other, all right? So when you look at maybe an area where it's densely populated, right? What sort of establishment do you have in that community? Should we look at maybe stop putting certain businesses here and maybe channel investment opportunities of other nature to that area? So it answers questions along that line. And it brings to the forefront, that image, so you can really appreciate what is happening. Businesses, is very important for the economy, yes, right? For day-to-day livelihood, yes, right? But what is the nature of business? Do we have more, let's say, more stationary stores in an area that's highly populated, and are there like a lot of children there? So does it really make sense that we're going to continue to approve more stationary stores, or are we going to bring in a supermarket? Are we going to bring in, maybe a community store or something that can actually, ease, maybe some bus fare for the general public within that vicinity? So to the business community, it's very, very important that they contribute towards the census. We're not saying that they're going to move, right? But at least for future planning, you'll have an idea like, okay, maybe this seems like sufficient. Let's get another type of business activity into the area.
Or it seems to me that they themselves can use the data as well, because they can see the demographic shifts in particular areas. If they need to expand their business, for example, to a particular area as well, right? Crucial important. It does appear to me, a final point on this, Stachel, the area of research and development, R&D, it's a huge area, right? And for example, AI trains on data that's available, right? So the more information is there, the better. It appears to me that when, for example, students at UA and the other universities are doing their research papers and their theses, that having up-to-date current information, comprehensive demographic data is crucial for research and development. How do we get into research if we don't have the data to start with? Yes. So it does appear that this helps out in relation to this as well.
Yes. So having a strong national statistical system in terms of where the census is a key component, because it's the largest statistical exercise or activity that a country undertakes. And so then therefore, especially in the Caribbean where we have these type of censuses, there's a wealth of information that can be used for not only by the students, academia, not only by business community where there's investment opportunities and business opportunities, policymakers for decision-making purposes, development partners to support initiatives to develop the country in terms of attaining sustainable development goals, in terms of making sure that we reach our target goals as a population, as a country, is that data with the added value of time and that times over trends, that analysis that you can do over time, then it gives us the ability to see where policies, where interventions, where opportunities can be taken and we can undertake the necessary steps to improve the country. So the better quality data, the better informed you are, the better the decision outcome.
We can do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities,
yes.
strengths. Excellent, very, very good. Gentlemen, can you imagine we run out of time? Andrew, can you imagine we run out of time? Extraordinary. So next week we're going to be on the road with the Census team, and in a future edition of the Census and You, we're going to be engaging members of the Hispanic community. So in terms of, we'll have the message in Spanish as well. So it's not just limited to English. And with the message in Mandarin as well. And can we do the message in French as well? Oui? Okay, good. All right. Only C and we. Okay, all right, there we go. But gentlemen, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. The Census and You, what we learned from this discussion so far, I would say one of the huge takeaways is the importance of data in national development. That's really what it comes down to. Your personal information is not going to be part of it. In fact, Stachel Edwards, just remind us, if you don't want to give your name in the census, I suppose you can not give your name?
Well, we prefer that we be able to get that information, but of course, we're not going to be like, okay, if we don't get that information, that is critical. The most important is to get the quality, accurate data that is of that, representing that, building that individual.
And I figure that you get you want person's name so that just in case you need to call them back to get back in touch with them.
Correct.
To check anything, that, to confirm anything, you can get back. But not for the data when you publish it.
Right. And not to connect that information with any individual.
Good. Excellent. So your name is only important for the enumerator, not for the data that's going to be published. Okay. In relation to the individuals, if they have a question tomorrow, if they, for example, meet up with an enumerator, they're not sure, they want to contact your office, what's the number to call?
The last time I mentioned this, I said 562-7495. Yes.
Okay, 562-7495.
Yes.
Yes, I think that number is starting to get etched in our memories now. So I think we can actually say it almost by rote. So 562-5475. Sorry, 6475. Oh, okay, I'm modeling. I think I'm modeling. Anyway, you can listen back. But let me thank Stachel Edwards. Of course, we'll have the number throughout, for example, our newscasts and so on. So that number is going to be very, very clear. Plus our social media pages. You will actually see excerpts of this discussion on social media tomorrow on our pages. Director of the National Bureau of Statistics, Stachel Edwards, and the member of the Technical Advisory Committee and Chief Surveyor in the Survey and Mapping Department or Division in the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands, Fisheries and the Blue Economy, Andrew Nurse. They've been our guests. They have been absolutely fantastic. And let me thank all the members of the National Bureau of Statistics team who've actually been engineering this program. It is difficult. It has been difficult. Any data collection is difficult, but they are doing a sterling job in ensuring that they're able to collect this information that is going to drive national development. We will thank them many years in the future for what they're doing today, because this is going to drive so many areas, an eclectic mix of areas in terms of national development. This has been the Census in You for this week. Join us next week, same time, same place, for another edition. You'll see us on the roads. Bye for now. Look after your girlfriend. Good night.
My name is Twenai Payne. I want to highlight the importance of the population and housing census for farmers. Our participation is essential to secure the resources and support needed for agriculture growth and food security. By uniting our voices, we can ensure that agriculture receives the attention it deserves. Let's make our voices count and strengthen our industry by mapping the present and shaping the future.